Chapter 11. 20 Lashes. Happy for a warm place to spend the night, Katie and the twins scrambled into the coach, but nothing could have prepared them for the long, uncomfortable ride across town to the house on Milk Street. They crowded onto the hard seats next to Mistress Hewson. Her 5 daughters and her infant son sat across from them. They were tossed and jolted on the springless seats as they bumped along over the cobblestones. The sharp winds bit at their faces through the open windows. But as uncomfortable as they were, Lily and Emma couldn't take their eyes off the passing landscape outside the coach window. Boston in 1776 was not like any city they had ever seen. There were neither cars, nor traffic lights, nor sidewalks. Instead, they passed horses and mules pulling wooden wagons, carriages, and carts. In the distance, soldiers' drums sounded. "I must apologize for the condition of our coach," Mistress Hewson said. "The windows were smashed by an unruly mob outside our house a fortnight ago. We are having them replaced. Of course there is a wait, for Lucas and Paddock are the finest coachmakers in Boston," she boasted, "though I'm sure your father's coach is far finer, with velvet cushions and broadcloth drapes, I expect." "Actually, we just have a normal Toyota," Emma answered. Then she cringed when she realized she should not have mentioned their brand-new modern-day car. "Yes, of course," Mrs. Hewson said, trying to look as if she understood, for she did not want to appear foolish. She pulled a small wooden pick from her silk bag and used it to scratch under her heavily curled white wig. They bumped along, going up one narrow street and down another, when the driver slowed behind a man pushing a large cart. The Hewson girls sat in polite silence until the youngest noticed Emma's hands. "Look at her fingernails! They're all red!" she cried out. Mistress Hewson leaned over to look, along with her other daughters. "Oh, my stars!" she exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Whatever have you done to get them so red?" "I painted them to match my toenails," Emma tried to explain. "Your toenails? You paint your toenails too?" Mistress Hewson cried. "Yes, all girls and ladies paint their nails where we come from," Emma assured her. "We are so cut off here in the colonies," Mistress Hewson complained. "It takes ages for anything new to finally reach us. I must ask my dressmaker at once if she can get me some of this new nail paint." Lily watched out the window as a crowd milled about a raised wooden platform in the open field. The coach came to a sudden stop and the driver jumped down. "What is it, James?" Mrs. Hewson called out the window. "The street is closed, ma'am. The guards are not letting anyone through," the driver replied. The color drained from Mistress Hewson's face. "I pray 'tis not another angry mob." "They do not look angry, Mamma," Mercy said, nodding to the people peacefully gathered in the field. "May we get out and walk, Mamma?" little Patience pleaded, kicking her feet against the seat. "Certainly not," her mother replied. "How many times must I tell you? The streets are far too dangerous in these times." "But we'll have to wait in the coach forever, so long. And I'm bored," Patience whined. "Lord knows how I thought to give you the name of Patience when you are the most impatient child I have ever known," her mother sighed. "We'll wait right here, for even if it is a peaceful gathering, with the pox going around the city, one can never be too careful." "Did she say pox?" Emma whispered. Mercy nodded. "Why, we hear more hammering from the coffin makers than from the shipyards these days," she said. Lily and Emma had read in school all about the smallpox epidemics of colonial America. They knew how fast the disease spread, and how it killed entire families. "The sooner we get out of here and get home, the better," Lily whispered to Emma. "Pray tell, good sir, what are all these people doing on the common at this hour?" Mr. Hewson called out to an old man who was walking next to the carriage. "They've come to watch the public floggings, madam," he told her. The crowd's attention suddenly turned to the platform as a thick-muscled man in a leather apron climbed the steps. He set down a bucket with one hand and held a long black whip in the other. Lily squeezed her eyes shut at the loud crack of the man's whip as he snapped it in the air. "Who is to be flogged?" a woman called out. "4 thieves, 3 caught stealing wood for their fires, and 1 for stealing a goose," the man answered. "How many lashes?" someone shouted. 20 apiece. They're getting off easy today." "What's in the bucket?" a young boy in the crowd wanted to know. "Salt water to throw on the prisoners' wounds," a woman answered. "A strong medicine they're not likely to forget." "That's the king's cure for you," a young man shouted. "First he taxes us to within inches of our lives, then he fills our city with his soldiers, closes our port, leaves us to starve and freeze, and punishes us when we try to stay warm." "You best keep those thoughts to yourself, lad, unless you want the redcoats to add some stripes and salt to your own back," an old woman beside him shouted back. "Are they really going to whip them just for stealing food to eat and wood to stay warm?" Lily asked. "I'm afraid so. They have broken the law," Mistress Hewson replied. She reached for the baby, who would begin to fuss and cry in Mercy's arms. "Father says that if the laws are not obeyed, the city will fall into the hand of criminals, and no one shall be safe," Hope added. The crowd suddenly parted to make way for a group of soldiers marching in step in their crisp red uniforms. As the soldiers passed, the crowd pressed forward, eager to get a better look at the prisoners, who were being pulled along by 2 ropes. There were 3 men and a young girl of 12 or 13. One of the men in the crowd began to jeer. "Stole a goose for your dinner, eh, missy? Well, now you'll pay the price." "We haven't all day," another shouted. "Let's get on with it. Get them up to the post and give them their due." There was a jerk on the rope, and the girl gasped as she and the other prisoners were pulled through the crowd and up to the platform. A wave of whispers followed in their wake. Emma hid her eyes, and Lily watched as the girl and the other prisoners were tied to a post. "Won't someone do something to stop them?" Lily asked. But Mistress Hewson hugged her baby close. "You children shouldn't have to witness such things." "I wish Papa was here with us," Charity whimpered. The driver returned to the window. "They've opened the street, ma'am." "And none too soon," Mistress Hewson said, looking back at the crowd. Lily's eyes were fixed on the platform. She watched the man in the apron raise his whip. She saw the young girl's shoulders stiffen. The crowd swayed back with a collective gasp. Lily swallowed hard. She shut her eyes tight. The whip cracked, and a piercing scream ripped through the chilled afternoon air. The crowd went deadly silent. There was another loud crack of the whip, followed by another blood-curdling scream. Katy put her hands over her ears and began to cry. "That's 2, someone shouted. A ripple of whispering swept through the crowd. Lily felt her stomach turn. She wanted to scream herself. She wanted to scream, "Stop! You have to stop!" Instead, she saw the man raise the whip over his head once again. The people in the crowd held their breath. "'Twould be better for you young ladies not to look out the window," Mistress Hewson said in a trembling voice. Lily and the girls instantly lowered their eyes to the floor, but there was no getting away from the continuous crack, crack, crack of the whip and the screams that followed. One was more heart-wrenching than the next, until the horses began to canter and the loud clatter of wheels over cobblestones finally drowned out the horrible sounds. Shaken into silence, Lily squeezed close to her twin on the seat. Emma's face had gone as white as Mistress Hewson's wig, and Katy was still sobbing beside her. Little Patience had begun to cry as well. It had been such an exhausting day. Lily closed her eyes wearily, then immediately realized her mistake. Frantic, she looked back out the window. It was too late, for now they were miles from where they had started, and the 3 girls, distracted by all that was going on around them, had forgotten to watch where they were going. Lily clutched Emma's arm and whispered in her ear, "We've lost the boys. Now we'll never remember how to find where they left us." Chapter 12. Ben Franklin's Boots. Back at Sutton's Mill, Matt and the boys sat mesmerized before the famous founding father. "Are you really the Benjamin Franklin?" asked Hooter, "the one who discovered electricity and lightning rods and the Franklin stove?" The old man smiled contentedly at the recognition. "I can assure you, I am the real and ancient article, complete with bad knees and bunions." He kicked off his silver-buckled shoes with a grunt and wiggled his toes in his white stockings. "Ah, that's so much better," he sighed. "Your face has become well known throughout the colony, sir," Moses said. Dr. Franklin nodded. "Yes, I've even had the dubious distinction of having my likeness painted on a chamber pot. Can you believe it?" He chuckled merrily at his own joke, and a chamber pot was what they used for a potty back then. "I've thought of wearing a disguise, but if I did, it wouldn't be that of an overweight old man, I can promise you. Nay, I'd prefer a more dashing look. Ah, the mischief I would make disguised as a young rake." "Do not let Dr. Franklin's modesty fool you," Moses told the boys. "He makes plenty of mischief, and all to the good of the colonies." I know," Hooter gushed. He leaned so far forward he almost fell into Ben Franklin's lap. Dr. Franklin raised his hand as if to wave away any compliments. "Many have given much more than I in this struggle of ours," he insisted. "I fear the liberty we seek will cost us dearly, for the crown is a mighty foe. The king has said that blows must decide. But little does he know how tight a fist we colonists can make," Moses said. "If only the blasted Tories would see reason and come over to our side. We could unite as one against the crown's might and end this bloody fight once and for all." Dr. Franklin's face clouded. "There's little hope for that now, I'm afraid. My own son has taken sides against me to favor the king. The divide cuts into my very heart." He looked away, and when he looked back, his voice rose with anger. "We must regain Boston from Hal, for 'twould send a message across the sea that America is no squawking, ill-mannered child to be punished and put over King George's knee." Moses nodded in agreement. "If our General Washington is to outfox Hal, he'll need to know what the Redcoats are planning." "Ah, there's the rub," Dr. Franklin said. "How to get such information?" He looked at Moses with a mysterious glint in his eye. "It takes a brave man to walk into the lion's den." "It is good to have you back in the colonies, sir," Moses said with a smile. Dr. Franklin shook his head. "In truth, I expected to retire to my books and my studies by now, but I find that Sam Adams and General Washington have other plans for me." "You've had word from the General, then?" Moses asked. "Aye, 'tis why I've come under the cloak of the strictest secrecy. My butler back in Philadelphia has instructions to inform all of my callers that I've taken to my bed with a bad case of the gout." Dr. Franklin chortled. "Old age offers one so many unpleasant excuses to choose from." "You've come with a plan?" Moses asked. "I've come with something useful," Dr. Franklin answered, as he reached into his vest pocket and took out a tiny rolled-up piece of parchment. He unrolled the paper and handed it to Matt. "Now, my boy, tell me what you see written there." Matt looked down at the piece of paper. He turned it over, but there was nothing written on the other side. "I don't see anything," he said finally, handing it back. Then Dr. Franklin held the paper over the lamp's flame. As Matt and the others looked on, a message in brown ink slowly appeared. Dr. Franklin's face shone with a boyish merriment. "'Tis called Invisible Stain. I came across it in my travels through Europe." "Invisible ink? That's so cool," said Matt. "Cool?" Dr. Franklin repeated. "Nay, the paper is not cold at all. But the hour grows late, and we've urgent business to discuss." He guided Moses to a far corner of the mill. Matt and the boys watched as the two old men put their heads together, whispering back and forth. What were they saying, Matt wondered? What were they plotting? Finally, the two men returned to the fire. Dr. Franklin sat on the stool, but they had hardly had time to get comfortable when a young coachman burst into the mill. His face was deeply pitted with scars. "We best make haste to get back to Philadelphia, Dr. Franklin," he said. "'Tis a long journey, and if the weather should turn against us, we'll be further delayed." "Yes, Samuel, I'm coming," Dr. Franklin nodded. But as he slipped his foot into his shoe, he cried out in pain, "Blast these bunions! My shoes are insufferable!" Then, spotting Hooter's sneaker on the table, his bushy eyebrows arched. He picked up the sneaker and turned it over in his hand. "Might I interest you in a trade, young man?" he asked. "A trade?" Hooter repeated. "What kind of trade?" "Your boots for my shoes," Dr. Franklin said. He held out one of his leather shoes to him. "The buckles alone are worth a pretty penny, crafted by a silversmith named Paul Revere. His work is well known in the colonies. You may have heard of him." Hooter almost fell off his seat. He quickly wiggled his foot out of his other sneaker and handed it over. The famous man slipped his feet into Hooter's enormous purple sneakers, and a contented grin spread across his face. They were a perfect fit. "Gadzooks!" Dr. Franklin cried, standing up. "I feel as if I'm walking on clouds. Why, what is this material?" he asked, touching the scratchy flaps. "Velcro," Hooter replied, showing him how it worked. Dr. Franklin burst into peals of laughter at the funny ripping sounds made by the Velcro. He opened and closed the flaps over and over, giggling each time it made the sound. "If you please, sir," Samuel exclaimed, "we mustn't tarry." Dr. Franklin put his hand on the man's shoulder. "A word of advice, my young friend. He that can have patience can have what he will." Then he looked back down at his new sneakers, which he couldn't stop admiring. "Why, these boots are so comfortable, I'm tempted to walk back to Philadelphia in them." The men in the room roared with laughter. Then he tipped his hat, winked owlishly at Hooter, and happily strutted out the door in his new purple boots. When the door closed, Moses walked past the elated Hooter and turned to Matt. "In 4 days' time, you and I will be taking a trip across the city." 4 days, said Matt. "But we can't stay that long. We have to find my sister and our friends. We've got to find them right away. We left them out in the cold. They are waiting for us to return." "You've got to do as you were told," the old man reminded him sternly. Matt stiffened. "The boys will wait here for you in the mill," Moses continued. "If all goes well, you'll be free to go on your way. Here, put this coat on. That strange clothing of yours will draw too much attention." Moses handed Matt a large woolen jacket with wooden buttons. "It looks awfully big," Matt complained, holding up the extra long sleeves. "Roll up the cuffs," Moses told him. Matt slipped the coat over his down vest and rolled up the cuffs. "Where are we going?" "We will travel as teacher and student," Moses replied. "That is all you need to know." What if we make a mistake and someone finds out we're not who we're pretending to be? Matt worried aloud. The old man's face darkened. His voice was low and deliberate. There is no room for mistakes. The redcoats will hang us at sunrise if there are. We'll not even be laid in hallowed ground. They'll throw our bodies into a common grave. His fiery eyes met Matt's horrified gaze. No mistakes, lad. There can be no mistakes.